Live, so I just want to jump straight into it. Welcome to Café Empatia's second episode podcast. We're calling this Charlas y Platicas with Dr. Frank Figueroa. And so the whole purpose around this is to, you never know who, your message, who's going to connect to, who's going to spread to, who it's going to have an influence on. So I really just want to give a space to who Dr. Frank is, how a little bit about who you are, how you got to where you're at. And so, Mr. Councilman, Doctor, PhD. And if you want to just touch on that, and then eventually just kind of go into talking a little bit about mental health and any areas in which it might overlap in your life. How have you seen it? What are things that you'd like to maybe destigmatize or just bring light to? But I want to go ahead and present Dr. Frank Figueroa, Mr. Council Member, Doctor, PhD,
Yeah.
and just want to give you your flowers. So
Yeah. Well, thanks for, inviting me to this podcast and Café Empatía and the whole concept of being able to spread a message because sometimes, we don't give each other that space or you don't hear other people that, having the same walk of life, right? And so talk a
yeah,
little bit about myself and, grew up in Coachella and, you know, saw kind of how things happen here in Coachella and kind of who got what, who didn't get what, and people still, don't get what they get, right? And so I
yeah,
think it's a larger socioeconomic issue that I have wanted to like fix what you can in the local level, right? In a
yeah.
local level, what are the issues? What are the social issues?
At what age did that start for you?
Oh, I
Because
started
I remember going to family parties, and I remember you being in
every
high school and
yeah,
you just talking about politics, about
every
what you cared about,
yeah, and
and
I think it started early on in my life, maybe like 8, 7, because I always got the newspaper in my house. It got delivered.
mm,
My dad he liked to read the news because that's how he practiced English.
mm,
And so he would read the newspaper and he was always like, what's going on? And he always kept up with current events. And, that's how I got the paper. And so I remember, I think what really triggered a lot was 9/11. I was in fourth grade.
mm,
And so, for me, I was a kid of the 9/11 and what did 9/11 impact my generation as a kid. It really
yeah,
impact, social impact and political stuff for some people and what happened, right? And so I remember watching on the television in fourth grade, like there was no class that day. We just literally were watching the Twin Towers
wow,
fall.
yeah,
And it's interesting to reflect back, be like, I don't think schools should have allowed kids to see that happen because it's very
mm,
traumatic. To just wake up at 6 in the morning, get ready to school, and you see the Twin Towers on fire, right? And
yeah,
Despierta America and watching the news getting ready. And I vividly remember how that all goes down, right, in my
yeah,
life. And I think that kind of really made an impact on me because after that, I, got the newspaper all the time. I have a collection of newspapers. So
really,
I have a collection of newspapers of when big things happen in the US.
mm,
The big ones I collect are like presidential cycle ones from like Time Magazine stuff. I have
mm,
when
yeah,
Obama became president, when Obama left office, when Trump became president,
yeah,
when, who people that big important people that died. So I have a collection of newspapers and it stems from that, right? I think the not political activism because I'm not an activist.
yeah,
I fight for the right thing. And I
mm,
think there's a difference between a politically savvy person and a person that's politically involved and
mm,
cares about social issues and is aware. And I think that's one thing that I really, really motivated me to like end up
yeah,
going to college and becoming a political science major, right? I went to community college and I was, I'm gonna be a political science major. And I learned a lot about
yeah,
international politics, like local level government, local politics is like where it's at for where you live, but
yeah,
international politics, we see it in today's world, like if you don't have a good, solid international affairs, relations, countries don't get what they want. And so that's what I learned a lot, right? And so
Yeah.
At a young age, I learned a lot about politics, and I learned a lot about local politics at a young age
Mm.
too.
Do,
So I
do you remember the first like big thing you did when you were a kid, or like something that, I mean, because I know like in high
I
school it's
did a
really
I
easy,
did a
right? Or
book
middle
report.
school.
I did a book report on Ronald Reagan one time.
No way.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, and I don't know what the affection is with Ronald Reagan, but I think it's because, a lot of people don't like him. Some people do. The gay community didn't like him because he was really anti-gay.
Yeah.
He's also big on like, and the war on drugs and all that kind of stuff. But Ronald Reagan just a fascinating character as a president, right? Like
Yeah.
how
Actually wrote a whole
he
paper.
captivated people because of the things he did. Like
Yeah.
he literally knew how to play politics, and he knew how to get people to say, "Oh, we like him."
Yeah.
And that's all politics is. People have to like you.
Yeah.
They don't have to agree with what you do sometimes. They just have to like you. And so I find it really fascinating because he said some horrible things, but he still got reelected to be, he was president for 8 years, right?
Yeah.
Before that, he was the governor of California. And so he was just a movie star. That's who he really was.
Yeah. He
A show,
became
a
kind of
show,
like an icon,
became an
right?
icon, and I also liked Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was just one of
Mm.
those presidents. So I like learned a lot and read a lot about politics, local government, American politics, you know. Um but that was like eighth grade. I mean, being 8 years old. I mean, I'm telling you, I was fourth grade
Yeah.
watching the Twin Towers fall. That really, I think, was the tipping point for me and for many people in my generation, like in my age range.
Yeah.
Like 9/11 was the like, oh, politics, like what's gonna happen? Our country's gonna go to war.
Yeah, and
Like,
I don't even think, like you said, at that point, I don't think like the nation or the media knew how much this would impact and influence, like, future generations to come, and just airing this and, letting little kids see it. But to the other point, it's like, if you wouldn't have seen that, would that have played a part in, you becoming, or you being like invested, or just kind of like, I feel like it's these little things that make us see the world through a different lens.
I think even if I didn't watch that, I think for me it was the newspaper. And I tell
Yeah.
people that's how I got involved into politics, but then it was also like um I went to I had the newspaper. I really like history, so I like reading about like, historical things that happen. And I always am a firm believer that history repeats itself, both in
Yeah.
politics and in the world and just everything. Like it's like a continuous, like people don't learn, but
Yeah.
it's just kind of some like social movements happen. We see it, happen in every generation, and it replays itself, right? And so in like 2001, social media wasn't a thing. But now you're in 2024 and social media is the key driver of like everything for the generation.
Well,
But
I think even to that point, like connecting it to, like how we're talking about, maybe for you was a newspaper, but going back, like, if the media didn't have a filtration for the youth now, like, I think about all the things that are happening internationally, and how social media has brought a lot of that to light on a lot of our feeds, so I feel like that's interesting, because there, that same filtration that you're talking about, like, isn't being applied to social media.
yeah,
And
uh,
it's crazy to think, like, just making that connection right now, and just being like, in terms of just like what's been going on worldwide, like, it's been heavy, like super heavy.
oh yeah,
And to be
I
like an adult working, going about your daily life, and then coming across these things, like, have been heavy. And so to think like a 5-year old interacting with that, or an 8-year old, and what the, implications of that might
I,
have, I guess it just.
I mean, I was getting the 8 years old, getting the newspaper and reading the headline of what's happening here today. So I knew what was happening in the desert
Yeah.
and at the local levels. I was learning a lot, like, oh, this is what's going on here today, or this or that. And I think that kind of opened my eyes because oh, the headline on the newspaper is this or this over here. And so made me more involved in local stuff to see, oh, like I remember when the city went from being a rotating like mayor to voting on having a directly elected mayor, and then we ended up with a directly elected mayor in our local city here in Coachella, and the rest is history. And then I remember going, and I think it would have been different because I got my information face front to me because I got a newspaper. If I didn't have that, I did watch t television and I watched the news. I liked
Yeah.
watching local news. I liked watching CNN. I was privileged enough to have cable,
Yeah.
and that's a big factor, right? Like that I was able to have cable. People that didn't have that, they might have gotten their news at school because the
Yeah.
teacher talked about current events or something. But I had access to something that a lot of people sometimes didn't have access to, which was cable, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of local stuff is on cable. And so like, the acknowledgement of some of the privileges that I had was like cable.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I can watch television. I wasn't just watching, Cartoon Network or like
Yeah,
Nick. I
that's
was
true.
watching like,
Yeah, I mean, growing up with when I was growing up with my parents back in Mecca, we didn't have that. Like, it is a luxury because we had the whatever channels that we had with the TV, and like that was that. So
yeah, I was privy to like
yeah,
PBS, you know, CNN, Fox News,
a little
CMN,
bit of
like
everything.
a
Yeah.
little bit of everything. So I was able to like watch what was happening.
Do you
But
do you do you do you find yourself having that same curiosity as you did when you were a kid, that 8-year-old reading newspapers, like
oh yeah, I
now
love
as an adult? Now
I
that you know what you know,
so now I have reduced the intake of
mm,
news, and because of how much like a lot of it is just like too much like to intake because it's very repetitive and it's like very like heavy to listen to. So now what I've done is listen to like NPR in the morning. There's like a quick 13-minute
the
podcast,
summary.
and
Yeah,
it's a quick summary. You just got to know what's new, what's updated, and it's just enough.
yeah.
I don't need it to be bombarding my life every day and every single second. Like I even don't have CNN
Yeah.
anymore.
It sounds like you have control over what you're consuming, right?
I
Because
have,
even
yes.
as an adult, even because I feel like going into, like, as adults, sometimes we feel like we have everything figured out, or we know how to do things right, and in reality, like, we're still learning even with these interfaces of social media, right? Or consuming information on the daily, and so, like, it's really easy to get caught up in these rabbit holes of information, especially because there's so much of it. So that's interesting to point out, because I feel like sometimes if it feels like we don't have control over it, and we're just flooded with information through our Instagram or
Yeah.
Facebook, and giving something like that, like how you're talking about, in terms of, because I used to do that too when I was living in LA, and I was driving every day, like, you're in traffic for an hour, so you got to keep yourself, for me, it's like I want to keep myself entertained outside of just playing music. So I feel like in that sense, you give control or you have control over what you're intaking, instead of just giving control to whatever platforms or medias you're using.
You know, and that's something that I had to learn, right? And so we talk a little bit more about myself. Like, I graduated at local high school. I went to CV high school. I was in marching band, and that, as I progressed, in K through 12, and I've joined band, and that's the
Yeah.
most disciplined thing you can ever join. It's like being in a military, like it's very
Mm,
military style the way it was
yeah.
ran, because the band comes from the military, right? Marching
Yeah.
band is a military style.
It's a
You
discipline.
know, it's a discipline, and it's like any other sport. That's why it's considered a sport. You can letter in it, right? If you're really committed to it, it becomes an art.
Yeah.
But the art is also a sport
Mm,
because you compete and you need to know what you're doing, and your brain muscle just is so insane about remembering things.
yeah.
You got to remember, a whole song, and
Yeah.
it's like 5 lines,
Yeah.
and it's like a 2.5 minute song, and you
And
got to
it's also performance,
it's a
like, people
perform, it's a
people
show.
people are judging you, like the way your posture is 100%. I feel like a lot of folks, think playing an instrument is binary, like just one way, but it's so versatile. Like, you're right. Once it becomes an art, the art becomes, what'd you say, once it becomes an art, it becomes kind of like, competitive, like it does. you know?
It
So
become yeah. It becomes
yeah,
a competitive sport. And so, but I learned a lot, right? Because you got to be disciplined and how do you get things in
yeah,
it. But as I progressed and, I went to college, I went to local community college, and, that was the decision I made. I
yeah,
wanted to go to a 4-year, because everyone's going to 4-year. And, but going to community college was the best thing I could have done in my life because it really allowed me to mature.
yeah.
And
Was that the first option or
that was not the first option. There was a
okay.
4-year that I had gone into, and then, you know, the overall consensus in my home was you should just stay. It's probably easier.
Yeah,
And, I think that comes from being like the oldest son, the first one. They're like, well, we don't know what this is. And especially
yeah,
when you come with parents that don't know what they're doing with like
yeah,
college, they're just like, well, you do what you need to do because you know. And I'm
yeah.
like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was like, that's why I need you
Put the
guys to help
responsibility
me,
on you.
right?
Yeah.
Like, they put on the responsibility on you. And I'm like, well, okay, I guess. But, I had a cousin who had gone to community college and she had walked me through it. And so I was lucky to have that kind of social capital,
Mm,
right? Of someone that he said, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this over here, and make sure they don't tell you this,
yeah.
and that was really helpful. And once I kind of, walked into the doors and was able to like, okay, I got myself set up. I took the initiative, right? Because of like, if I didn't do something for myself and I didn't, what was my goal? My
Yeah.
goal
Your
was to
goal.
finish in 2 years. And I was like, I'm going to finish community college in 2 years. It was the best experience I could have had. I made so
Yeah.
many friends from across the valley, but also international friends.
Yeah.
From community college, I have one friend that I still talk to, but
Mm,
I became close to other people.
yeah.
And some people become distant, and
Yeah.
not by choice, not because you become distant, like they also become distant. And
Yeah.
so trying to reconnect with some of those people has been challenging, but I'm still working on that. So, I
Yeah.
tell people when you make friends, some friends are meant to stay, and some friends are just transitional friends that are coming into your life.
100%. That and that's
And
yeah.
you shouldn't be not be sad when they leave because they served a purpose.
Yeah. I
And their
yeah.
purpose was a year, 6 months, whatever that was. They weren't always meant to be there. And you always have to be watching because a lot of people are transactional friends who want something done
Mm,
for themselves and don't return the favor.
yeah.
And, maybe you doesn't mean that the other person's that because you yourself can be a transactional friend,
Yeah.
right? And in my profession that I work in, work in higher education, but I'm also a politician, right? I'm the city council member in the city of Coachella. Everyone wants to be your friend,
Because
but
it's
I have
transactional.
but I
It
have no friends,
yeah. It's
right?
yeah.
Like it's
So I appreciate what you're touching on. And I feel like before we kind of dive more into that, I just want to touch on a couple different things you mentioned. One was social capital, and just if you don't mind, just
yeah,
touching on that and elaborating on it just a little bit, just because
yeah,
I feel like if the audience isn't familiar with the term, but
yeah,
you mentioned that, and I'm curious how that plays into just kind of now you're understanding with that, like you said, as a politician, as somebody who
yeah.
works in the UC system, like what that looks like for you, and in regards to kind of like you going to community college, like it is like we're talking what you're talking about, it is a big burden because you have to take those first steps. And I feel like with those kind of things, I'm always grateful for the experiences that life grants me, because kind of like how you're saying for yourself in terms of doing marching band and doing these other things, like a lot of that, like you said, is discipline. And I feel
Hmm.
like when you think about going to community college, especially out here in the Coachella Valley, when you think about going to the community college, it kind of feels like a struggle uphill because the process is so, it might be feel complicated, or
Hmm.
require
Yeah.
a lot of your attention. And I feel like just how you touched on these different aspects that have sculpted you into somebody who's disciplined and accountable, you're
Y-
able to follow through and
Yeah.
finish community college, transfer, get go and push above and beyond for higher education. So whatever you want to start with that, but I know there's a
Yeah,
couple
we'll
things.
start with the social capital, and for like the listeners who don't know what that term is, and I have a book. You can go Google Scholar me, Frank C. Figueroa and Google Scholar, and you can find my dissertation and
There it is.
learn a little bit more about,
Check it out.
Latino males and pursuing terminal degrees. But, that was a big thing as social capital came up, right? Like, and that's something that, we need to research more in the Latino community. Social capital is like it's just like, we talk about wealth, social wealth, like people that have generational wealth. Social
Yeah.
capital is like goes hand in hand sometimes, but it doesn't always have to equal monetary. So social capital is when you have access to someone that can help you.
Yeah.
And so it's the access to something. So when I talked about the social capital that I had access to and I was purview to was my cousin who had already done, community college, was, going through her own process. And that was a form of social capital because I had access to someone who could help me.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who are first generation don't have access to social capital. And when I went to community college over, 15 years ago, um, the system was not always meant for, Latino men, and Latino first generation. They weren't like, it wasn't all about like the the focus on first gen and first gen this really pushing for first gen. First gen is a concept of the last 7 years in
Mm.
higher education, right? And then my
Interesting.
perspective
Yeah.
in 2010, right? Community college was just like, well, this is where you kind of come enroll and you kind of do something like, we're going to help you transfer. We want you to transfer, but the 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 state
Yeah.
wasn't really pushing for the transfer numbers. It was kind of more like, well, you're going to go to community college, it's a junior college, go and do. The retention wasn't there.
Yeah.
Um, and people like, from where we from Coachella, like in Eastern Coachella Valley, the social capital wasn't there because they weren't doing these outreach programs. There wasn't this
Yeah.
big
Exactly.
emphasis. It was more
100%.
like, well, here's COD, go in and enroll, have a nice day. No one told
Yep.
you there was a placement test. And if
Hmm.
you didn't place into this, you were going to be delayed 2 semesters because you had to take extra English, extra courses.
Yeah.
And, my cousin told me you need to make sure you score well on these things. And if you
Mm.
don't, that's fine. And I'm like, it's also because that test was rigged for
Mm.
English Spanish learners in my perspective. And it's
Yeah.
finally gone. The placement test still exists, but everyone is, it's made for recommended remedial
Mm.
courses, right? And it was, a system to keep people longer. But sometimes it did work because there
Yeah.
might, you might not have been at that level of reading or
Yeah.
level of
Yep.
understanding, right? And it takes a long time to really like, especially when you come from a 12 K through 12 school district or system that kind of just cranks people out, in my perspective.
Hasn't
It
set
doesn't
you
sit
up for success?
if you're
Yeah.
not set up for
100%.
success, right? Because
100%.
teachers are there just to teach the subject, but if the students don't get the subject cross, that's that. And
Yeah. They can pass with the grade, but not with the knowledge.
that's the thing, right? An A
Yeah.
is an A, right? But it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you know the subject because it might
Yeah.
have been curved on a grade on a graded on a curve where it was just easier, like, oh yeah, we gave them A's.
Yeah.
That's great.
I love how you're what you're touching on because I feel like it sounds and I'm curious to know like what your thoughts are, but it sounds like community college has, and this is kind of like what I've been seeing just kind of in California, but I feel like there's slowly been there's like a shift in identity in community college,
Yeah,
where it's like because like I agreed. I think that at one point
it
in
was.
in in the state, where we were at, it was kind of like pushing first gen, and I was a part of that. I feel like, and now, you know, I feel like community college, and I'm not talking about all of them, but in certain ones, like they've been pushing for more support, more kind of like wraparound services where they can go ahead and support students academically, like mentally. They can go ahead and provide like tutors, and there's support in these processes that maybe before seemed a little bit more complicated or acted as a barrier. But it's interesting just to see that because I feel like community college is a great step in terms of like going into higher education, and it has this stigma. still, and slowly I feel like we've been peeling at it, but um yeah,
You know, one thing that community college has changed. It's now looked at like, oh, that's where I should go first because it's cost savings. People have like shifted
financially.
the narrative,
Yeah.
right? In the perception,
Which is a smart move,
which is
you know?
smart. And that was always the purpose. So
Yeah.
that's why when I went to community college, a unit cost $26.
Ew.
$26 a unit, so I could take a class for under $75. I can get an English college level course, college level math for $75 to just take the class,
See, but
right?
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
That I feel like though is something that, like,
That
that level of
is
understanding.
comes from social capital. And that level of understanding only happens when someone who really understands it
Yeah,
and you trust tells you, listen,
yeah.
this is why you need to go here.
Sounds reassuring.
It's a
Like,
reassuring. It's not just a, oh, well, when it comes from
yeah.
your parents that don't know anything, they're like, well, just go to the community college. A college is a college. And I'm like, well, a college is that, but is it accredited? Is it not
Mm-hmm.
accredited?
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's all these different aspects. Can I
Yeah,
transfer there? And that's some of those questions you ask, right? Like, hey, I want to be an economics major.
yeah,
Do they have the courses I need? Oh,
yeah,
okay, they do. Here's what I need to do.
yeah.
And I benefited from community college because I joined the special, like, federally funded program.
Mm,
And I only went because I had another cousin who was
mm,
at community college and told me, hey, you should apply for this program because it gives you, it gives you priority registration. You got to
yeah,
register with everyone first because that was so key because that was the burden, right? Because the way registration happened was based on how many units you had. So if you didn't
yeah,
have any units completed, you went last.
yeah,
So you got like the lower ranked teachers or the really bad hours. You had to take classes at nighttime or you didn't get the best time courses. I benefited from that because
yeah.
after during my first semester I applied for that program. It was the Trio Aces program. It
Mm,
is a federally funded program, and I didn't look back after that. Joining that, can maintain my grades. I
yeah.
joined. I had priority registration. I had special advising. I was able to talk to a one-on-one advisor that knew my name,
Mm,
remembered me, didn't just be like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll see you next. Didn't just be like, here's your program. I was able to check in and say, hey, what should I do? I ended up working for that program as a student worker because I
mm,
was always in there. And my thing was, I went in there because they had the resources. I didn't have to carry a laptop. I did have a laptop, but I was able to use resources. They were able to let you print.
yeah,
But it only happened because, again, the social capital access that I had from someone else telling me, you should join this.
yeah.
And of course, you could only join if you met certain thresholds of income, right? Because
Yeah.
it's made for low income people,
Mm,
for people whose families don't make a lot of money. Um, but because of that, right? And I go back and be like, I couldn't have gotten an education if it wasn't for my parents, because my parents weren't wealthy. And sometimes people get mad because it's like, well, low income people get these. And like, well, low income people also don't have the money to afford to be printing, to have
yeah,
access to a laptop. These programs are made for people like me at that time that don't have money to maybe buy a laptop
yeah,
or, can't afford this. So that is one thing, right?
yeah.
But one thing I do tell myself now, if I could go back and tell community college Frank, is how do you better manage your money? And
Mm,
that's something that needs to be reinforced by parents or young people today and said, how do you properly money manage your funds? And
yeah,
how do you balance and fund manage your income? Because I think what happens when you first get to community college, it's like you get these big O check disbursement
yeah,
and your eyes just open because you're like, I just got how much money? It's like that money is made for you to survive the whole semester. It's like, oh, I got my refund check. And I still see it to this day because I work
yeah,
in education. People will come, I got my refund check, or I'm going to get this summer stipend, because I pay students stipends in the summer. And I'm like, but that money's made for you to survive. It isn't just
yeah.
an extra money, it's considered financial aid. Make it, it can impact you long term, right? And so I think one thing I would go back, the access I did not have
Yeah.
was money management. And
Mm.
now they've really pushed that. Even in the K through 12 system, they've like done programs where open a bank account for your kids and you get $100 free.
Yeah.
Um,
No incentives.
a little incentives, but also like how do you budget out your refund check? What is it made
Yeah.
for? It's not made for you to go to Sabaros in the mall every single week, every
Yeah.
single day, right? Because, personal experience.
Um,
I love Sabaros during that time. I would go and get the pizza and
yeah.
just go on. But see,
Yep.
I didn't have a car when I started college, right?
Mm.
I didn't get a car till maybe like 3 months in. I rode the sun bus, I rode the public transportation, and
Yeah.
I liked early morning classes. I started at 8 a.m. So what did that mean? I woke up at 4:35, waited for the bus at 6, and I got to Palm Desert by the time like 7:45, 7:30. It dropped me off from the corner of Monterey and Fred Waring.
Mm.
And I walked over to the school and I was there the whole day. I brought
Yeah.
like snacks, I brought food, and then if I wanted lunch, I'd go to the mall, get on the sun bus, and I had the pass, right?
Yeah.
The 30-day pass.
I'm curious, Frank, because when you talk about this, like I come from the standpoint of going to a four-year university out of high school, so our experiences are different, but I think about how within my experience, like there was luxuries and there was parts where I had to really really put in the effort to just make it count, and so you know I always appreciate my brother's experience because he went through a similar experience like you did. And I remember just him grinding and doing his thing, and he put in work to finish, and he did. And so I feel like within that, did you ever feel like, you know, um, that self-doubt voice in your head ever creep up from time to time? Because, like taking the bus, going to community college, like being first gen, you also bounce these identities of like, did you ever struggle with like, I didn't go to a 4 year, I went to community college, and I'm supposed to,
S-
or just
It
grappling with these thoughts.
so that comes when you transfer.
Mm,
That comes after the
okay.
self-doubt. And then I did have it, I think for me, like when I ended up making the choice that I was gonna stay and go to community college, I was upset, I was sad, I was excited because I was gonna leave and all this fun stuff. But I more was more like, okay, I didn't have that. You know why? Because I had someone help me, walk me through it
Mm,
in
yeah.
community college. And I found community college to be what I did find hard was not the self-doubt in oneself. It was more of the trying to find time management. Because in
Yeah.
community college, while you're still living at home, going back and forth, you have this freedom, right?
Yeah.
That you've discovered, like, oh, I have these friends and we're gonna go. So it allowed me to have some self-doubt, be like, oh, I don't know if I can pass this class or what am I doing? Am I gonna finish it? It was more of not self-doubt, but more of, am I not gonna make it in my timeline?
Mm,
And I think for me, it was because it was such an easy transition. I had people help me. I had things happen that I had someone help me walk me through that process
yeah.
that I didn't feel alone. That I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, people supported me. I think I can do this. This is not as hard as I think it's going to be. And I think that big thing from community college to someone that goes to a 4 year and that self-doubt in that first year of being a community college freshman to a community college at a 4 year university is everybody in a community college, you don't really know their socioeconomic status other than when you see them driving a Mercedes Benz.
Mm,
Um, in a 4 year, there's people that come from money and they flaunt it.
yeah.
And I think the
Yeah.
self-doubt comes there because you're in this melting pot of a school that these people come from backgrounds of life, and I come from a little small town where my
Yeah.
parents are farm workers, field, blue collar job
Yeah.
workers, where these people's parents are hedge fund managers, like,
Yeah.
or like the owners of like some big old chain, right?
Yeah.
And
So
in community,
kind of
it's
like
an
imposter
imposter
syndrome,
syndrome, right? And
you
then,
know.
the self-doubt is there, like, oh, I don't think I'm gonna, I don't think I can do this. Like, why did I choose this?
Yeah.
But the self-doubt for me came when I transferred.
Mm, yeah.
But what one thing I do remember, and one thing that really helped me, was finding a community. And
Yeah.
a community means, for those listening, is a group of people that you could connect with,
Yeah.
right? And finding people who you really vibe with.
Yeah. That's good.
And in community college, I found a group, and that's how I really, I think, grew up in a way. I can tell myself, oh, I grew up as a young adult. Like I went from being 17, enrolling in college,
Yeah.
to being almost, I was 19 when I finished community college, and in 2012, and then I went off to a four-year university. And what helped me transferring, unlike other people, is I went to the University of California, Riverside, which is only 70 miles away from my house,
Mm.
and I could have commuted back and forth,
Yeah.
but I chose to live on campus to get that experience because I wanted to go away. My brother at that time was already in um, finishing high school, so I went to transfer to community college, and I was a third year in community in my at UCR, and my brother was a senior in high school, and so by the
Yeah.
time I became a fourth year, he was his freshman, and so he went to UC Irvine.
Mm.
So I already had a year in my belt to be like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, you need to make sure you do this, or you need to do this. So then I was
Yeah.
able to help him do
Give
stuff, right?
him, yeah, provide that
The,
social
this,
capital.
but when I got to UC Riverside that first year, like it was hard. I
Yeah.
think for me it was like leaving home, and it's like, oh, I'm ready to, okay, let's go move in. And it's like, oh, I don't want to stay. I
Yeah.
want to go home. And I found myself coming home, every weekend. There was,
Yeah.
you know, that's where I met one of my close friends that I still talk to, Mr. Anselmo, he probably
Yeah.
listens to the podcast somewhere, right? And,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Montez and,
Shout out
and
on Selmo.
myself, and we'd take the sun bus. At that time, there was a sun bus that would drop people off at UC Riverside,
Mm.
and I remember, encountering him and like, hey, blah blah blah. We became friends, and
Yeah.
closer friends, and because he was also in band when I was in band, and
Yeah.
he was making a network, right? And so then I
Yeah.
make friends, and then I had upper division courses and learning the difference. That's really where the imposter syndrome and the self-doubt hits, is where you're like, oh, we have to write papers. It's not just a Scantron anymore. Like every single
Mm.
class has papers. It's, in community college, it's like, oh, we have a Scantron, or, a blue book, and it's just writing it. But like, it wasn't like you're gonna write a full-blown essay
Yeah.
as part of the assignment. The essay
Yeah.
was, oh, blue book is answer short questions. You know, I can't do this, or, biting more than you could chew, right? But me creating that circle, I think really helped. I joined a lot of student orgs,
Yeah.
lived on campus in housing, so I was really involved in housing. And I think that really helped me, you know, that first year I didn't really work. I didn't talk about when I worked in community college. I worked at the bookstore, and I worked, in the federally funded program.
Yeah.
And when I came to a four-year, UC Riverside, the first year I didn't work. I kind of took it easy, transitioned in, and then that first summer, after, going into my fourth year at UC Riverside, being a senior, right? Ready to graduate, I started working in housing, and I met this forever friends that I will, if it wasn't for that summer, I don't think I would have met these people, and
Yeah.
they became my forever friends, right? That, will text every day,
Mm.
and, I'll meet with them. I reach out to one. I haven't go to their weddings.
Yeah.
Um, but those forever friends, right? Because it's like there's a difference between the like short-term friends, the friends
Yeah.
from a certain era, but these were like forever
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah. You
10
feel it.
plus years this year,
Yeah.
since I graduated
Wow.
college, right? This is gonna be
Yeah.
10 year, 10 years since I graduated from college
Wow.
this next month, coming up in a couple of weeks, right? It's like, oh, staring at my diploma here in front of me, like, okay, 10
Now
years later,
that's
and here we are, right?
that's graduating from UCR.
That's graduating from UC Riverside, right? 10 years.
Wow.
What is that? 10 years later, what does that look like, right? What would have 10 years ago graduating from high school, I mean, college, Frank, think, right?
Yeah.
Like, whole nother world. It's like, I don't think I would be still working at UC Riverside. Like, oh,
Mm.
I love, it's like growing up and being a child there, right? Like,
Yeah.
literally being a kid, like a young adult, to
Yeah.
becoming, an adult. and creeping into like the mid 30s,
Yeah.
and like being like, why am I, this is such an interesting life, right? And so
It
my
is.
forever friends, we talk about like, where are we 10 years later, right? And so I think
Yeah.
we're gonna do something. For some of them, it's already been 10 years, been 11 years, but for me, I think it's last year would have been 10 years since we, all first, kind of met,
Yeah.
because they all had graduated and they all had
Mm.
worked that extra summer, right? And they all
Yeah.
had graduated and they just, well,
So
we're gonna work on this.
if you wouldn't have worked that summer, you wouldn't have met them, like you
I would
said.
have never met them.
Yeah.
No, never would have met them. And some of them I knew before because I
Yeah.
was in a house, I lived on campus, and some of them lived on campus. Um, but a couple of the ones that I also became really close to, I would have never met.
Yeah.
Right. And so that
Crazy.
summer really kind of created a little bond, and we only hanged out for a summer, but became so close friends.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we
It really be like that.
It's
Just
it's because we lived together. We lived on
mm.
campus. We lived on
Oh
campus. We
yeah.
lived in the same dorm
Yeah.
together, and it wasn't like we were working with each other. And most of us weren't taking courses, and if we were.
Yeah.
I mean, we did a full blown overnight. We did a weekend San Francisco trip to San Francisco to visit one of our friends.
Wow. That's nice.
Um,
So then I know, so it sounds like, throughout your process of just, becoming who you are and where you're at, it sounds like there's been points in time where, like you said, building community has been important for you and has been
yeah.
fundamental and foundational, and just your support and
S-
your that morale, that motivation. So in that sense, like, and I know earlier we talked a little bit about kind of like relationships and them being transactional. How do you feel like that part of yourself plays into now, like as you're going into, like, being a council member, and still doing like what you do on the side? And what would you say to folks, like, because I think at the end of the day, when since we're talking about it, it's kind of like, because somebody knows you, it's like they're immediately, I feel like that's something that would somebody would use as like, well, I know this person, so that would leverage as like social capital. But it doesn't mean it's a meaningful relationship. And so, like, people trying to, I guess, trying to shift the mindset of, like, because it sounds like you're using people, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
and having a transactional relationship, it's like, well, this is my intention, and you know this is what's lying behind what I'm trying to do. So I guess, like, especially as a business owner, as going into
Yeah.
this realm, it's like, you know I'm very big on, like, trying to create connection and meaningful conversation. And again, you can sense people's energies and just kind of where people are coming from. And
It's-
I think that carries a lot of self-awareness, and I feel like in those senses I have to be very compassionate and really, just really know my own worth and know where things are at. And that's been hard as I've gotten to where I'm at, especially because I'm a people pleaser, and so, like, that's innate in me and that's in my nature. And so, it's very easy for me to say, be the yes person. Um,
y-
but I've had to, just be
y-
self-aware of that and take two steps back.
s- so for me, I'm a people person. I like to make friends. I
Mm,
like to connect with people, but I use my ability of creating friendships
yeah,
because there's different levels of friendships, and I know what friendship I have with this person, what friendship I have with this person,
yeah,
even at work. I work in a bureaucratic society where everything is transactional. And
yeah,
so, you know, that for me is why I know that, if I know Joe and Fausto wants to know Joe because Joe does video editing.
yeah.
Be like, oh yeah, I know Joe. Let's connect you because I'm creating the transaction. So I
Mm,
see myself as the creator of the transaction for people
mm,
because I want to help people out. And it's not
yeah.
because I get anything from it. It's because I've put in the work to create that relationship with both individuals that
Mm,
then I bring them together.
Yeah.
And
It's
I don't,
connecting. Yeah.
it's the connecting piece. And for me, it's like, I don't, I've created a great byproduct now. I might not get anything in return from it. I just know like, oh, something great's gonna come from it. And they'll remember it
Yeah.
was because Frank connected us,
Yeah.
or that sense, right? And so I'm that type of person, and that's my personality. I'm a people person, I'm a friend builder. Um, but I also am now more aware, especially with the roles I carry,
Yeah.
of when someone wants to be your friend. But
Yeah.
I'm very good at reading people, right? Of like their auras, and when they
Yeah.
walk in, like someone just wants to use you. And I think, that's one thing to learn, for people listening, is like, how do you know when someone's being genuine to you, about being your friend, and someone just sees the opportunity for them to say, oh, I know so and so.
Yeah.
I know this person, right? How do you, like, people want to leverage who you are for themselves,
Yeah.
right? And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah, like there's the people that I knew before this,
Yeah.
and the people that came after. And the people
Mm.
that knew Frank
The real ones.
before,
Yeah.
the real ones, right? The people are going to show up. Like the people that were there that day one, like they don't
Yeah.
care that you're this. Like
If you were taking away the title, they would still be there.
they would still be there because they don't
Yeah.
care that that title's there,
Yeah.
right? That title is just, being a council member is for the community, it's for the people. You know, I use the title to help the community back.
Yeah.
And that's the whole purpose of it. They put you there so that you could give back to them. Like, hey, your light's broken. Hey, you have this. Here's a number you need to call.
Yeah.
Like, people in my family know he has the ability, or he knows who to contact for you or give you their number. Here's the number you need to call.
Yeah.
Give him this number. Here's the business card. Here's all the numbers. Give these people this call.
So it sounds like, you've gotten to a place now where like, you've and I love how we're just the whole notion of like the social capital just keeps tying in, but like you've gotten to yourself to a point where you're able to give access to some of the barriers that exist within some of the things that we might be looking for. And like I just want to give you your flowers because like you've put in work and you've put in time, energy, like everything, family, just to do what you're doing, and to
Y-
get to where you're at. And so it's like for other folks, because a lot of, I guess, a lot of us are trying to be that connector, or that I guess some of us do put that responsibility on ourselves to get to a point where we can go ahead and um provide these things. Maybe it's not financially, maybe it's access to, maybe it's information,
yeah.
but I guess like how would you uplift or just tell folks like I guess for
It-
people who are trying to get to that point?
for me, I've come full circle. It's my turn to be the social capital, access
Mm.
to people and give it back, and tell you this is what you need to do. This is where you need to go. I'm going to help you get this.
Yeah.
Like, it's the full circle of karma, because
Mm.
a big believer of karma, and you need to, karma is a full circle, and sometimes you just forget about it and it catches up to you again, right? But for
Yeah.
me, I've gone full circle from a kid that didn't know how to enroll in college to someone that, people come and ask, oh, can you talk to our grandkids, or can you do this? Because now it's, my turn to give it
Yeah.
back, right? And so I think for those people that are like in that process navigating, and you're always, I look at it as, it's not that I know more than other people, it's just that I have this lived experience
Mm.
that I know, that I have learned. It's not that
Yeah.
I know, and not that I know everything. I'm not, Confucius and I know it all and I can have a third eye. It's, I have a lived experience, and
Yeah.
now I can go back and tell you, well, this is what I did. I wish I would have done this, this, and this, because
Mm.
I'm now able to give back from my perspective and
Yeah.
say, this is what I did, this is what I wish I would have done. And I think this is, and it's recommending. I don't tell
Yeah.
people what to do. I recommend to people, this is your options.
Yeah.
You choose what you want to do,
100%.
but I'm giving you the opinion from someone that has been in your shoes.
Yeah.
And so the hard part about today's generation is they're just like, well, you're just an old, grumpy old man. And I'm not old. It's just a perception,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, you're just, because now I'm in the shoes of my cousins where they were in my shoes 10,
Mm.
15 years ago, right? Like, that other generation now that has kids and is past that, and I'm looking at like, okay, that's what I'm gonna have to deal with next. Like,
Yeah.
that's where we like, go next and stuff. But it's where uh, giving them back. And so those people that are in that progress, listening and how do I get to be that part is like you need to just have your lived experience.
Yeah.
And if it drops you down to the floor and your cookie tower crumbles, you pick it back up and you get back up, because even myself, sometimes I'll
Yeah.
just crash,
Yeah.
right? I have learned that I can't do everything, so I have to take it day by day sometimes, because it's
Yeah.
sometimes I have a full paper calendar that I calendar out my whole month. Because if I don't calendar my life, I'm gonna miss something that I said I was gonna go to.
Yeah.
If people don't send me a calendar invite, I will like be like, well, it wasn't on my calendar, so I can't.
Yeah.
If you didn't book me, then you didn't book me. But it's also my responsibility to like calendar my life,
Yeah.
because I have to find time for myself. And I think that's one big advice I tell people is you want to do everything, but you can't, and pick and choose what makes you happy. And it ties into we talked about at the beginning about mental health and all that kind of stuff. But before we get in there, right, and I've traversed this very interesting life in navigating self-identity, right? And I think that college Frank
Yeah.
could have had a more happier life if they would have
Mm-hmm.
been their authentic self earlier. Would have been a different life, right? And
Yeah.
so that's one thing where I tell people, like, don't let things hold you back because you're scared of it.
Yeah.
And it be like, either be who you identify as, who you are. If you know who you are, just run with it. Be
Yeah.
who you are, because then you wait too long,
Yeah.
right? Until you're able to feel comfortable. And then you feel like you've missed out. But everyone does everything at their own pace. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to rush to it. It just means you got to do it when you feel comfortable,
Yeah.
right? And so um that's kind of some advice there for some folks, right?
Yeah.
But just in general, whatever, that applies to everything in life, right? You do what you got to do at your own pace, not anybody else's. If you're in college and you're going to graduate this year and your friend is going to get engaged in the summer and got engaged, like, that is great.
Yeah.
I don't need a rush to go get engaged. I don't even have a partner. I don't have,
Yeah.
boyfriend or a girlfriend, whatever. It's like you're at your own pace.
Yeah.
It's a marathon, not a race,
Not a sprint.
not a sprint. You're gonna get to the finish line when you get to the finish line at your own pace. And it might not be the next year, it might not be the following year, it might be 10 years from now, right?
Yeah.
You do what you want to do at your own pace.
Yeah. That's
And
important.
so, going into that topic of mental health, I think it's something that the Latino community doesn't talk about a lot, and a lot of people would really benefit from it. I
Yeah.
personally like to go to it because it really helps you find a space where you can open up,
Yeah.
and just decompress.
Yeah.
Because I think what happens a lot is you bottle it up, and then you erupt
And
and
it
you
comes
lash
out.
out on the people that love you the most. And then it's like,
Yeah.
it's hard to, like, someone take that baggage, like, you just vomit on them, like, figuratively and literally just vomit on them, and they just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's not fair. And I
Yeah.
think going to therapists, while bless their souls, they have to deal with people so much stuff, like,
Yeah.
they don't know you. They're just gonna take it and be like, oh, okay, this is what I think you should probably do, and restates it back to you. And it's an ability
Mm.
for you to say, oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Like, it's so eye-opening, because they would like be like, well, maybe you should do this. And they give you recommendations of what you just told them. And they restate whatever you just did in a different way and how you benefit from it. And so therapy and mental health is so important, because in Latino community, the macho man be like, I don't need that. That's not what I
Yeah.
need. It's like, well, it's not like bad. It's gonna help you. Like, maybe
Yeah.
you just can reconnect why. And so for me, it's like grief collection, right? Grief is a lingering thing that just goes on for life. And I had
Yeah.
to learn that grief is a wave. It comes, it goes, it comes, it
Mm,
goes to the shore. Sometimes it's high tide, sometimes there's nothing there, and it's like you're just living a normal life,
yeah.
and it just hits you like a freaking hurricane.
Yep.
Just
All at
shows up
once.
on your door and it goes all at once. And it's
Yep.
just like
Doesn't
you
care where
just
you're at, who you're
I,
with.
I mean, I was at a wedding yesterday
Yeah.
and like the grief came out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And so and it's just like why is it just hits you
Yeah.
because it's one thought.
And I think the biggest thing though in that is giving ourselves the grace and the permission to fully accept what we're feeling, because it's easy to just push it away and be like, this is not a good time right now, or I shouldn't be thinking about this, either because we're working, we're busy, we're in a relationship, we have kids. And so, like, I feel like that's why we bottle it up, because it's a part of us and it's who we are. um but a lot of times, like you say, it's important to catch it, because then it becomes a repetitive process or pattern, and this self-expression, this way that we self-express ourselves, becomes a part of our identity. And kind of like how you said it leads to us unbottling the what's been bottled up for a while on the people around us, and now we're known as a person that is constantly getting mad because we can't really express what's on our mind or what's on our heart, because of the fact that people are going to see us some kind of way. um
And, that's one big thing, right? Like I let the emotions just ride out
yeah.
yesterday, right? And but before I wouldn't, I'd be like, dude, de-started myself and be like, what's going on? I can't do this. But
Yeah.
I've learned that I have to just let it happen because if not, then where is that emotion gonna go?
And I think that's important to ask, because especially coming from the Latino community, and especially as men, talking on this, I feel like it's easy, again, to I feel like a lot of us carry self-awareness. We just sometimes the ignorance is bliss, and it's easier to just look past, whatever it is that's inside. And so it's easy to just pick up a bottle, if you were in another mindset at the party, and be like, well, instead of just letting it ride the waves and having catching myself and acknowledging what I'm feeling, I'm just gonna drink a couple beers and just let it numb out. um and it's sad, but it's something uncommon that happens within our culture, within our community, within our family. And so everything that you're touching on is, I feel like, important. um just because it's good to get that outside perspective on what's going on for ourselves, and to have somebody just listen in a non-judgmental way. And I just want to ask, like, what do you feel like now? You said, earlier, going into your mid 30s. What's been a tool within uh your toolbox that allows you to, you know um sh- peel a couple of the layers of this mental health? Like, what does that look like for you? Going on walks, you know any little thing that you like to.
You know, walks are fun, and I think walks are really important, but also for me, it's like getting away from my computer. I'm a workaholic,
Mm,
so I need to find time not to touch it. Like I've touched it this whole weekend, right?
yeah.
Um, and I wish I wouldn't. I mean, so it would have been better. I didn't really do a lot of work, but it was more I just stared at it. And one thing I need to find better is to not touch my computer and be on like a FaceTime or talking to someone.
Mm,
Um, because I have really bad ADHD and so I get
yeah.
distracted, right? And so, but
Yeah.
then I feel like I'm not participating,
Mm,
right? And so when I want to participate with someone, I'll tell them let's go for a walk and leave our phones.
mm,
Right. And I
yeah,
think it's
that's a
about
good
like
one.
leaving things where they are, where it's just you and the other person you want to have real conversations.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's one thing I like to do. And I like just to go to lunch with people.
Yeah.
Like go to lunch with people and be like, okay, how you doing? you know, how do we, interact and talk to someone that I usually don't I talk to, but like I haven't seen their face to face in a long time, right? So
Mm,
what does that look like? How do we do that? So
yeah. Yeah, I agree. What's one thing that I guess you'd like to bring light to, on the sense of, mental health or emotional health, whether that be a stigma that still existent within our community, something that you see, whatever that looks like. What do you feel like we, as a culture, as a community, as a society, I guess we need to bring more attention or awareness to, even though mental health encompasses a lot of different things.
I think it's okay to go and ask for help. And
Mm,
it's important to ask for help the first instance.
mm,
Not that, oh, I'm going to take care of myself. This will be fine. It's just a one-time thing. If and when it happens to you, seek the help right away.
yeah,
Don't wait. Don't prolong getting the assistance.
yeah,
Personal experience, I waited, I think, longer than I needed to go talk to someone
mm,
about my grief.
yeah,
If I would have done it faster, I think it would have helped me heal faster.
yeah,
Because you can't get rid of the grief, but you can heal and learn from it.
100%.
Um, but I think for those people who, might fight or, might encounter, self-harm or have, um, addiction
Yeah,
usage incidents, you know, seek the help.
yeah,
It might be scary, or ask someone else to go with you. Don't go alone if you're
mm,
scared. Ask your friend, ask your sibling, if you have a relationship, ask your partner and say, hey, because what happens a lot is it isn't just you who's getting hurt. It's the people around you. And you have to remember about that. Like, what is your partner saying? Like,
it's a real
it,
one.
it it's
Yeah,
it's real because who's really the one that's, if they truly love you and you like them and then you get upset because they leave you and it's like because you didn't seek help,
yeah,
right? And it shouldn't come from them telling you to go do that. And I tell this also for the partner
yeah,
or the family member. Don't force people to look for help. Suggest it and make it come from them.
mm,
Because
yeah,
when you force someone to go do something, it will never work because they feel forced. They feel like they're getting told to do something. And someone who is in that mindset sometimes cannot be told to do something. It needs to be, oh, yeah, I think I need to do it for
yeah,
myself.
yeah, yeah. I agree. Um, and I just have one more question, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and wrap things up afterwards. But you know, I know you said grief was something that recently has um, something that taught you a couple of lessons. And I guess what's the biggest thing that you've learned from grief, and that you've been able to kind of, I guess, manage it and cope with it, because I feel like it is a very strong and heavy feeling. And when I think about grief, I know I heard a saying where it was like, you don't the grief never goes away. You become bigger than the grief itself. And I feel like that really opened my eyes, because especially losing my birth mom and losing my papa, my grandpa who took me in. I feel like those were two big pillars, and I feel like I really had to um go get him into my turtle shell to really ask myself, or really understand, like, how I'm able to process this. And I'm thankful
S-
that I was able to. But yeah.
For me, the biggest thing I learned about grief was not to fill the void of grief with something else, because
Mm,
that's what I did. I
yeah,
filled I filled the void with something else to keep that from being in my brain, in my thoughts. And then when I didn't have that anymore, I tried to fill it with something else and something else,
mm,
and it just didn't work. That was my self solution from grief.
yeah,
What I was able to find with seeking support and help was you need it to let it be there. You can't let it
mm,
be filled by something else.
yeah,
You need to make time for it. You need to acknowledge what you can't and can't do in grief. And so for me, losing my dad was just out of the blue, it's like probably the worst grief you can probably get,
Yeah.
right? Because there's like different griefs,
Yeah.
right? There's the grief
Hmm.
of when you know the thing's gonna happen, and then there's the grief when it happens overnight.
Yep.
Like when it happens overnight, you're just like, you can't believe it. You just lost.
Yeah.
You like,
No
but because
explanation.
no explanation, no, like it just happened.
Yep.
I think the 4 months after that, it was just like a blur,
Yeah.
a blur. And so I just filled the gap and filled the void with something else, kept myself busy, kept myself busy. Now, the support I found was knowing how to deal with it,
Mm.
letting it come in, letting it be part of your life.
Mm.
And when you have those moments, one of the biggest suggestions I got was think about the happy components of it.
Mm.
Not this, not just, it's gonna be sad
Yeah.
because you're gonna be sad, but think how happy that time was.
Yeah.
Because then it helps you deal with the grief in a positive way where you're like, yes, I'm sad, but then I also have these memories to remember.
Yeah.
So that's, I
Yeah.
think, a big piece.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, for myself, I think that's one of the things that grounds me is being thankful for, mi papa and him taking us in and just always showing us that love. And I think from my mom, my birth mom, is just always, I'm thankful for the moments that I got with her and the love that she was just able to give me. Because I think as an adult, it's shown up in just ways that I'm able to express myself and just how I'm able to give to those around me. So I am thankful for that. Before we go, Frank, is there any last words? I know last podcast I shared with Melina that what's one word that you would like to um label or give to the, I mean, we're entering the second half of the year. So is there a word that you'd like to, you know, um, give to the second half of the year? Mine, to give you an example, last year was focused. This year is organized. So I'm trying to be a lot more organized. Um, so uh, any word come to mind, and then any last words that you'd like to just share before we head and
Uh,
jump off?
for the next, we're halfway through the year. I think one word that for myself, and so people can resonate with it, I think is reorganization.
Mm.
Reorganization and
That's funny.
reassessing,
Yeah.
right? Reorganization, reassessing, those type of two words are, co and hand in hand. And for me, it's because it's that time of the year where you're like, what didn't I tell myself I was going to do the last 6 months?
Mm.
And what can I still do?
Yeah.
And what didn't work, right?
Mm.
So I think that's reorganization is a key word. It's what I've been trying to do for the last 2 weeks.
Very nice.
So,
Okay.
well,
Well, I want to thank you for jumping on. I know today was Mother's Day, and happy mothers to all the wonderful moms. So I know it happened a little later in the day, but I'm thankful that we were just able to get some time. And I tell folks, these conversations are selfish but selfless, because I'm just able to spend an hour talking with you. But it's selfless because I'm able to just share this with everybody. So thank you for being on, and hopefully, in the near future, once we go ahead and get things going down the line, you can come on back on and share with us everything that you've done and where you're at then.
yeah, yeah, definitely come back. And thanks for letting me join and be part of the second episode. And, hopefully the listeners enjoyed our, conversation and just remember that at the end of the day, you got to put yourself first and your path. You're not the first one that's walked this path. There's other people. So reach out, talk to people across your circles, and hold on for the ride.
Hold on for the ride. Love it. Thank you, Frank. And
Of course.
I'm gonna end it here and just stop the recording.